everybody. Welcome to Cherrywood Live. Carla Overland here in Brainerd, Minnesota, and I am the owner of Cherrywood hand-dyed fabric. We dye all of this fabric ourselves, and it is 100% cotton, and it's dyed to look like suede. So thank you for joining me tonight. I have a couple of treats for you. First of all, I want to show you this quilt, these sweet little owls. And I am going to be doing a giveaway, not of the quilt, but we happen to have one kit left from when we used to have this pattern. And you get all of these luscious colors. This is, again, all hand-dyed fabric, and the colors are dyed in gradation and put together in a bundle. So the kit includes the background fabric and all the owls and the pattern, which is called Mod Owls by So Kind of Wonderful. And then they have a ruler that you use, and that all comes together. And I am going to give that away to a random person who shares this video. So right now, hit the little share button in the lower right corner, and we'll see how many shares we can get, and then I'll pick a random number, and that person will get the free kit. Another treat I have for tonight is, you've heard me talk maybe about the blue dyes. We're having a little bit of a supply issue with blues, and so it's been a little bit tricky. Some of the colors that you maybe remember from, well, even earlier this year may be a little different, and I've been experimenting a lot with different formulas. So I have ended up with a couple of blues that I may only do one batch of. I could repeat them, but then I'm not sure if the supply is going to be there, so it's kind of a limited quantity. So I'll show you those after this video, and we're going to be learning about Peter Byrne. He is a Cherrywood ambassador. So Peter, when did you start quilting, and do you belong to any guilds?
Yeah, so in 2009, I retired after being a hairstylist for 30 years. I had wanted to make quilts for quite some time because I have an aunt that's a quilter, and every summer when I would visit, she would like show me all of her new quilts, and I just found it very inspiring. So after I retired, I had lots of new time, and I bought a little sewing machine and started sewing. So I made quilts for all my friends and family, and that was a lot of fun. But in 2017, I decided I wanted to really learn everything I could about quilting. So I joined the Toronto Modern Quilt Guild. I live in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So I joined the Toronto Modern Quilt Guild and really became a full-time student of quilting and a full-time student of learning quilting. I've taken over 100 classes online, and through the year 2017, I studied and practiced, and I studied and practiced. And in 2018, I took on a part-time job at a local sewing school and actually taught quilting for a year at the sewing school. So that gave me a lot of practice and some insight on perhaps teaching workshops in the future. But in 2019, I stopped working at that school because I wanted to really focus in on my quilt making. And I decided to take my quilt making in the direction of making quilts specifically to go into jury shows. So my first quilt that I made in 2019 was called Starring You. And the first show that I entered that quilt into was QuiltCon, and I won Best in Show. So quilting dreams do come true.
Yeah, they certainly did for you that year.
Yeah. So my quilts in 2019, I made 6 that year, and they have gone into a variety of quilt shows, and some of them have made their way into magazines, and some of them have been turned into workshops. So it's been a real fun learning journey since 2017, and we're in 2020 now. And I mentioned just a moment ago, I'm retired, so all of my time really is for myself. So I feel very, very fortunate that I can work on quilting as much as I want to without having a lot of other commitments that have to take me away from quilting. And I've also been able to take a couple of my quilts and design workshops. And pre-COVID, I was traveling and teaching workshops, and I very quickly redesigned my 2 workshops so I could teach those on Instagram. And that has been a lot of fun because on Instagram, I've met people from all over the world, and the quilting community is super awesome. And it just seems the more people I meet, the more I'm enjoying it.
So tell our viewers about how you heard about Cherrywood and how we met.
Yeah, so I was down in the States for QuiltCon 2020. I had like the ultimate experience at QuiltCon with winning Best in Show and getting Best Machine Quilting as well, which is kind of like second prize. So it was like just an awesome experience. So for the first 3 days, I kind of stood where my quilts were and just talked to absolutely everybody. And then on my 4th day, I wanted to make my rounds and talk to vendors that I knew I would love to start a relationship with. And one of those was Cherrywood Fabrics. So I made my way back and saw this beautiful display of all of this fabric and started to have conversations with Carla and everybody else that was working there. And that went really well. So when I got home after following QuiltCon, we continued our conversations, and Carla asked me if I would like to be a Canadian brand ambassador for Cherrywood Fabrics. And of course, I was like, yes, because I love this fabric. So we kind of worked out all those details. And from there, I got back from QuiltCon, I guess it was towards the end of February, and I'm now working on my 4th quilt made with Cherrywood fabric. This is Cherrywood fabric. So quite often my style of quilting is working with solids, but I also like to have one print fabric in there as well. So with this quilt that we're looking at, it's called Amethyst. And my inspiration for this one was looking at the colors, all of these beautiful colors from Cherrywood Fabrics. And I really wanted to work with all of the purple tones and put something neutral around it. So that was the original thought in my mind. And after I got back from QuiltCon, people were saying to me, so what is it that you're going to do next? So what is it that you're going to impress us with? And so my answer to that was, I had never done this before, but I thought I would make a quilt and literally show every step of that quilt on my Instagram feed. So as I quilted every day, I took pictures, and that evening I posted pictures, and it was a really, really fun process. So with this quilt, I developed a technique about 1.5 years ago called hover quilting. And hover quilting is a form of raw edge applique, but it's absent of fusible web. And this technique allows you to get a beautiful, soft, frayed edge to your piecing. So if you look really closely, oh, here we are, you can see that all of the edges of the piecing, after it goes to the washer and dryer, it becomes frayed. And it just adds this really soft and luxurious texture to the quilting. And this was my first hover quilt that I used using the Cherrywood fabric. And I was so pleased after it went through the washer and dryer because it just frayed so beautifully. So that's where this quilt started.
Yeah, and Cherrywood has a very high thread count because we wash it so many times.
Yeah.
So I was pleased when you said that the fraying, frayed just enough for you.
Oh, it was awesome. I did notice that as soon as I started working with Cherrywood fabric. I'm a pre-washer, so I wash and dry all of my fabric. So I get to know it quite well before I actually even start to work on it. So when I was pressing down my Cherrywood fabric and looking at it, I noticed a few things about it that I really hadn't seen on other fabric. One certainly was the tight weave of the fabric. It's a very high quality base that they use for dyeing all of their hand dye fabrics. And the layering of color is also very interesting. Like I mentioned just earlier, I love working with solids, but cherrywood fabric solids are different because there's a lot of dimension to the color. They're not flat looking at all. It's kind of like if you took a super high-end ultra suede and mixed it with a flannel, you would come out with the feel and look of what cherrywood fabric is.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it, I guess. You have been kind of giving people a sneak peek of this quilt, which I think is fabulous. Tell us about
Thank
this
you.
one.
Yeah, so this quilt is one of two. So there's two that are, I made at the same time. So they're sort of like a half apart each of one exhibit. And it's called Unshuttered, Shuttered. So just the quick story behind this is this quilt is supposed to represent all of the beauty that we saw in the world and maybe didn't really realize pre-COVID. And then the quilt that we're going to show after this is called Shuttered, and we'll get to that one in a moment. But with this quilt, how I approach this is I designed a block, which is called the 9 Cabin. I made 2 quilt tops. So one was with all of the neutral colors, and one was with all of the darker purples and pinks. And when I had those quilt tops made, I laid them on top of each other and did a little bit of sewing together so they wouldn't move. And then I used a stencil that I had made and penciled in these large orange peel shapes. And then I just free cut the fabric. So what I was actually doing was cutting all of these large pieces so I could mix those 2 colors, the tan and the dark purple, together. So all of these pieces that we're looking at are large pieces of applique. And I actually used the hover quilting technique again. If you look very closely here, you can see that when these pieces were appliqued down, they were done with the raw edge so I could get that extra texture. So part of the challenge with this quilt was lining up all those seams. And I love challenging myself. And every time I make a quilt, I'm always experimenting and trying something new. So I was very pleased when I was able to stand back from these quilts and look at them. And I achieved my goal, which was like getting all of those lined up together. Looking at the cherrywood fabric in these quilts is just beyond awesome because of the depth of all of those dark burgundies and rich cherry colors and purples, being right beside all of the neutral light butterscotch and caramel tones. The contrast in this quilt is spectacular. And I think that really has a lot to do with just using cherrywood fabrics and the depth of color that you get, even within the neutrals. They're just awesome. So that was the start of putting these 2 quilts together. And
I'm just fascinated that all of those, I was watching what you were doing on Instagram, and I had thought maybe you had sewn that curve together, and I thought, how could he get all of those seams to line up with the seam, but you're doing the hover quilting?
Exactly. So with the hover quilting technique, you're laying down the pieces of applique side by side, and you're not actually sewing them together. So you don't have to give any thought to that extra 1/4 inch seam allowance. So when I was putting these pieces together, I was laying them down, lining them up as close as possible. And then I use glue sticks. I use glue sticks all the time in my quilting, and I just get the washout kind from the dollar store, and they work fantastic. So there definitely was some work happening on my table to get all of these large pieces to like line up and behave. But because I was using the hover quilting technique, it did make it easier to line up all those seams for sure.
Yeah, very cool. I think even if you would have stopped at just the, what did you call this? A 9-patch log cabin?
Yeah, so it's basically a 9-patch and kind of a log cabin put together. So I called it a 9 cabin.
9 cabin, yeah.
Yeah.
That was exciting in itself. And then when you cut them apart and put them back together, that was super cool.
Thank you so much. I personally thought they looked really beautiful on their own. And I would have been really happy just to stop and have them as they were, as quilt tops. But as people get to know me and know my work, I'm always pushing and taking that extra step. So when I originally designed that block and made those quilt tops, it was totally with the intention of cutting them up and
Stopping it up.
moving on
That
and
takes
moving on.
bravery.
Yeah, thank you.
So here's the second part.
So this is the second half of those two quilts, and you might notice with this quilt that it is the mirror image of the other one, except where the light colors are in this quilt, colors were in the other quilt. Something else that you're going to notice about this quilt that's quite different is the second half of this exhibit is supposed to represent how our lives have changed so much after the arrival of COVID-19, with a lot of small businesses and even big businesses failing and having to shutter and close down and put plywood up on their doors and their windows. And even now, we have a new experience with going to restaurants where there's plexiglass dividers everywhere, and we're all together, but we're still apart, and we're all having to wear face masks. So with this quilt, I added an extra layer, and I cut these beautiful sheer fabric about the same size as what a face mask would be. And I sewed them right on top of all of the piecing and quilting that I had done to make this previous quilt. So as we see here, when you zoom in, you can see the sheer fabric right on top of my piecing and right on top of the quilting that was there. This was the final step of making this quilt. And I always make my quilts where I say you can wash and dry my quilts 100 times and they'll last forever. But with this one, it was such delicate work that I just had my fingers crossed when it went through the washer and dryer that it came out okay. And it did quite well. Most of these pieces, sheer pieces, stayed on. I had to replace a couple, which was no big deal. But in this picture, I just find it so interesting to look at with this sheer fabric sitting on top of the quilting design and the piecing.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, and it's so nice to see close-up photo to see, you know,
Yes, so
that white face.
this exhibit is definitely something that I'll look forward to when we can actually personally get together again, and people can come up to this quilt and see it on exhibit and just have like a super close look at it, because there are so many layers of detail on this quilt. And you know, the basis of this quilt is cherrywood fabric. And if it wasn't for that vibrant fabric behind these sheer panels that I put on, it wouldn't have the same impact. So, you know, right from the very beginning of designing this quilt, with making those two quilt tops with the cherrywood fabric, brings us to a really nice finish that we're looking at here.
Yeah, it's very, very exciting to see your mind at work.
Thank you, Carla.
Tell us about what you're working on now.
Okay, so this is my newest quilt that I'm working on. And with this quilt, I'm doing the same thing that I did with Amethyst, which is as I'm doing my quilting and sewing that day, whatever it is that I'm working and preparing, I'm sharing it on Instagram. And that's at Peter's Quilts. My feed on Instagram is at Peter's Quilts. So with this one, there's actually a repeat in this block. So there's 16 pieces of fabric that make up a large square, and then it's repeated. But the repeat is a little bit of a challenge to see, and that's kind of fun. But what we're looking at right now is the background for everything that's going to be appliqued onto this quilt. So what we're looking at right now, most of it is actually going to disappear, but it is the foundation for this quilt. So what I did was I went through my cherrywood fabrics and I pulled out some really beautiful soft grays, black and white, and then the two accent colors, which are greens and yellows. So there's a quilter by the name of Christina Watson, and I did her workshops, classes on Craftsy in 2017. And she really was one of my favorite teachers. So I actually watched her classes on Craftsy a few times. So when I was at QuiltCon, the first morning, it was like a buffet breakfast. So I get my breakfast and I sit down, and Krista Watson is sitting right opposite of me. So I leaned over and said hello. And anyway, it seemed like every corner that I went around that entire 4 days, we were bumping into each other and chatting. So this wonderful friendship started. So she's brought out a new line of fabric, which is called Good Vibrations. And there's one fabric within that line called Gumball. And when I saw the design in this fabric, I was so inspired by it that I actually contacted Krista and said, I love this particular pattern that you've brought out. Can I bring this pattern to life in a full-size quilt? And of course, she was like just so wonderful and awesome and said, go for it. And she's been very supportive. So the pattern that we're going to see, if we can maybe move on to the next, here we go. So the pattern that you're looking at here is actually very close to the pattern that's in this piece of fabric that she brought out. So like I was saying before, the first image that we saw was all of the background pieces. And so what I've done here is I've just pinned all of these half circle shapes in place to get a look at, like a glimpse of what this quilt is going to look like when I actually do put it together. So I'm very excited about this quilt. I have my quilt top made, so I'm now ready to make my quilt sandwich. And after I have my quilt sandwich made, then all of these half circle shapes will be appliqued and quilted right on top of my quilt sandwich. There are going to be a few more twists and surprises. So what you're seeing here is certainly not exactly what you're going to see when the quilt is finished. So you'll have to watch and see how this quilt evolves.
Yes, I'm sure that you've got a few tricks up your sleeve.
I do. I have a few tricks and surprises. And one of the really awesome things when I look at this image, I just find these colors so calming and so relaxing.
Yes,
And
that's very nice.
that was a bit of a surprise for me, because when you think of putting yellow and black and green and white together, you may not think this is going to be a very calm quilt to look at. But yeah, the depth of color within the Cherrywood fabric really does add some extra dimension to what we're looking at here. And it's just a very calm combination of colors working together.
Yeah, it is. And I love how you took, so you basically took a commercially printed piece of fabric and enlarged it and recreated it out of more fabric.
That is exactly what I did, yes. And I've never done this before, but like I said, you know, Krista brought out this new line of fabric, and I got a yard cut of, I think there's 20 different in this collection, and I got a 1 yard cut of each. And after it went through the washer and dryer and I was looking at this particular one called Gumball, I'm like, I think I'd like to bring that to life in a quilt that's like 80 by 90 inches big. That's usually my target size. So
I was going to ask, how big are the shuttered and unshuttered? I can see what's
so
behind
they, after they came through the washer and dryer, they do shrink a little bit going through the washer and dryer, and they finished at 66 by 78.
Okay.
Yeah. When I first started making quilts, I was making quilts for friends and family for their beds. So I was always making a queen size quilt. So I got used to making very large quilts. But I have to say now that I guess, you know, going back a couple of years and starting to make quilts where I'm actually keeping them for myself and taking those out to travel in a trunk show, I'm really trying to make my quilts a little bit smaller, just so they travel a bit easier.
So is there any other projects in the works with Cherrywood, or are you keeping them secret under your hat?
Well, I usually have anywhere between 3 to 5 sort of designs in front of me that I'm always kind of wanting to finish the quilt I'm on so I can move on to the next one. So yesterday I got my graph paper out and drew this design, which I don't even know if you can really see there or
Yeah,
not, but this is my high-tech way of designing my quilts.
it's like stitching on a cocktail napkin, but you know,
Yeah,
more
yeah. So,
sophisticated.
so my quilts really just, they go from my head to my hand, and there's not a lot of like preparation or planning on paper. I usually use like one piece of graph paper to draw my idea, and to have that one piece of paper just to write my notes down and figure out what my sizes are. And that's really about it. It just goes straight from here to here, which is awesome. So I usually have like 3 or 4 or 5 different plans in front of me as far as like quilt designs go. And I still have a couple of colorways that I haven't explored yet with Cherrywood fabric. So I'm sure I'll be getting to those with my next few quilts.
Cool.
I started doing ruler work, so working with rulers, and I guess I've been doing that for about 1.5 years now. And I've really, really fallen in love with doing ruler work on quilts. And it's just another whole sort of like new world to explore with doing ruler work. And the combination of adding free motion with ruler work as well is super fun, very creative.
So are you marking any designs, especially on the Cherrywood? I'm curious if you're using chalk or if you're just using the rulers.
Yeah, so I do a very minimal amount of marking, and I use something called the friction pen. And it's a pen that when you're writing on your quilt, it looks exactly like a ballpoint pen with regular ink, but you take your iron to it, and as soon as you put heat on it, it 100% disappears.
Really?
So yeah, so if I'm marking fabric that's lighter or medium tone, that works really well. And if I'm marking on fabric that's super dark, then I definitely will use my chalk pencil.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like using a dressmaker wheel without the teeth. So it's just and you can like impress the line into it or bruise the fabric.
Yes.
That works really well with Cherrywood.
Yes. Oh, good to know. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and you can actually, I think I've gone up to 6 or maybe even 8 layers where the impression will go through and mark.
Will stay through,
Yeah, especially like in a half square triangle when you have to mark that kitty corner line. It's nice.
Right, okay. So there's a little tool called a harem tool. And
good.
I think it does very close to what you're mentioning, because I've used that as well, where I'll put my ruler on my quilt and take that tool and push the tool across, and you get a mark there, but there's nothing to wash out.
Right.
Yeah. Most of my marking is dots. So I'm sort of like quilting from one dot to the next. Okay. So it's like a very, very minimal amount of marking. On the Shuttered and Unshuttered, there's a quilting pattern there known as the orange peel. And with that pattern, I did no marking whatsoever, just using the ruler in combination with the piecing itself. So every quilt is a bit different and the marking is a little bit different on it, but I'm very much like you. I just keep it really simple with the marking and keep it minimal.
And obviously, so for your hover quilting technique, everything has to be quilted first, but you said you're just using glue. You're not using fusible because you don't want those edges to be fused down, correct?
Yeah, so everything is fused down temporarily with a glue stick. So, you know, with your traditional raw edge applique, you'll be putting some type of fusible web on the back of that fabric and pressing that down onto your quilt top. So this is kind of the same, like you're pressing it down onto your quilt top, but you're just using a glue stick instead. So when it goes to the washer and dryer, all of the glue comes out, but you get to create that really soft, which is super cool. Should we talk about my workshop?
Yes, I was just going to ask you. So when things actually like get back to normal and we can take workshops and come, where can we find you and what workshops do you offer?
So I have 2 workshops that I'm offering right now. my quilt that won Best Machine Quilting at QuiltCon is called Cityscape. So I designed a workshop around all of the different types of quilting and improv piecing that I used on putting that quilt together. I do have a small sample here that maybe I can put in front of us. There we go.
Oh, yeah. Great.
Yeah. So this is an 18-inch square, and on this square, you can see the different details of the different types of piecing and quilting that are done. So this is the project that people make when they're going to do the Cityscape Improv Inspiration Workshop. And I have another small one here. And this one is, I think, about maybe 16 or 17 inches square. And this is what students make when they take my hover quilting workshop. So with this one, it has a black background and some pretty colorful fabrics. There's an equal amount of printed and an equal amount of solid fabrics. And this one, we're using the half square triangle as the shape, and we're shaping them in different manners. So when you put them together, you create different shapes on your quilt. So I made a very large quilt called Pathways, which is 90 inches by 100. And it was made with 2.5-inch square half square triangles. So there's 1,440 half square triangles on that quilt.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And that one actually was published in Curated Quilts when they did their magazine for different types of applique. Yeah, so that was really awesome to get that quilt published. And so my 2 workshops are really, really full. Like there's a lot of information for one day. So what I do is I leave them on Instagram for 48 hours. So people can like start sewing on the day of the workshop, but they still have the next day after that to hopefully finish their project.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So they have time to let it sink in. And
yeah, because like I knew when I was teaching live that my workshops were quite challenging because there's just so much to try to get through in one day. So when we were going virtual, I'm like, oh, this is actually good because I can give people more time. I also post pictures and I also have text. So I'm covering all 3 bases. And then I'm also emailing everybody the workshop handbook before the day of the workshop. So they also have that handbook as well. So I'm coming at them in every way I can because people learn differently. Some people only like to look at pictures and some people only like to look at a handbook. Both of my workshops that I'm offering, the platform that I'm teaching on is on Instagram, and you can find me at Peter's Quilts. And at Peter's Quilts, you can also find my schedule. So I have classes that the dates are written down and lined up for every month for the balance of this year. So it's all online and really easy to find. And if you are interested in taking a workshop, all you have to do is email me and we'll start the intake process and go from there.
All right. And you have a website?
I do, yes. So you can find me at peterbquilts.com. So every time I'm posting on Instagram, I make sure I hop over to Facebook and post there as well, for sure.
Okay. Yeah, and I hope that we can work with you to get some Cherrywood kits for some of these classes in the future, because that'll be a lot of fun.
That would be awesome.
Well, thank you, Peter, for spending the afternoon with me and showing us all your new stuff and all of your classes and workshops and really exciting stuff.
Thank you so much, Carla. It was my pleasure to be here with you today. And I know I've said this several times already, but I just love the Cherrywood fabric, and I'm so happy to be working with it and designing with it and quilting with it. And just look forward to bringing more Cherrywood fabrics out for sure. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
So what did you guys think of Peter? He's pretty talented, isn't he? So that was Peter Byrne. He is from Toronto, and yeah, Canadian. And he's a brand ambassador, so I'm really glad that he walked into my booth at QuiltCon, because I think it's going to be a start of a lovely relationship. So do check out his classes. Obviously, you can tell that he's very well prepared and very well spoken. So, and also, speaking of Canada, if you are Canadian and live in Ontario, we also have a Cherrywood choice for a premier store, premier quilt shop, and it's the Cotton Harvest, and it's in Seaforth, Ontario. So check out the cottonharvest.com, cottonharvestquiltshop.com. I'll put it in the, double check that that website address. Yeah, check that out. So again, I am giving away a free kit for this quilt, and I'm going to pick a random person's name from whoever shares this video. So go ahead and share it to your page or your quilting group or whatever, and tomorrow I will pick one name to win the kit for that. So I promised you that I would show you some colors of fabric that are limited quantities, and you guys can hear me, right? Okay. Lost my train of thought. Blue has been a crazy thing. There's a worldwide shortage of blue dye. Certain component that goes into certain blue, which I use in a lot of my formulas, they're a plant burned down, and obviously that put a little chink in the supply system. So I am experimenting with the blue dyes that I have to see if I can come up with new colors. So I often do a single batch. Well, sometimes I don't mean to do it on purpose. Sometimes I screw up and I can't repeat it, so we call it a single batch. Well, this blue I'm calling Coastal Blue, and it is a single batch because I'm not exactly sure I can repeat it again. And it's a really light, I'm not going to stand too close, it gets washed out. It's a really light robin egg blue. So this is on our website, cherrywoodfabrics.com. Go to the live section, click on live on our main menu, and I'll show these three colors that I have limited quantities of. It's available in, I believe it's available in half yard or 1 or 2 yard lengths. And by that I mean the longest piece we do is 2 yards. In order for the suede texture to come out evenly, all of these bundles here are folded so nice. Those are 2 yard pieces, and that's as big as they come. So if you want 3 yards of this, you will receive 2 pieces. One piece will be 2 yards, one piece will be 1 yard, all from the same dye lot, obviously. So this is Coastal Blue, $20 a yard, and it is very limited quantities. The other blue I have, I'm calling Evening Blue, and this piece, you can really see the suede. If you haven't seen Cherrywood in real life, this is a good representation. So you can see it's not just flat color. There's some tone-on-tone texture. That texture may be different on both sides. And again, this is Evening Blue, which is kind of similar to our Cobalt, but it's more blue in it. So if you like those deep, dark cadet blues, check out Evening Blue. And then I have Tomato Red, which a few of you have said, bring back Tomato Red. So we have a small quantity of this available. Tomato Red, it's a really saturated red-orange. And that is $20 a yard on our live tab on our website. And then do check out, I have some collections. Ooh, that shows up pretty. Collections of 8 fat quarters. This I think we're calling bell pepper. red peppers and green peppers. And this is, it's normally $40 for the 8-step gradation, but it is on sale tonight for $35, and probably we'll keep that sale going for until next week. So this is, pepper, bell pepper, 8 fat quarter pieces of fabric. And I don't have a sample here, but there's also 2 or maybe 3 other collections that we haven't told the public yet, or on our newsletter. We're telling the viewers here tonight first. And there is a color wheel one. So it's 8 shades from the color wheel, and the dark and the light versions of all 8 of those colors. So perfect for those dark light designs that you need in a quilt. And that's normally $80, and it's on sale tonight for $70. So you save $10, and you get all shades from, I believe, red to maybe the picture and the description will show you, because I can't remember all this. So yes, the color wheel is on sale tonight on the live tab. That bundle's on sale tonight. What else do I have? I am going to cut it a little short tonight because I have to go home and prep for my first Zoom class on Sunday. I'm really looking forward to that. And I think a couple of you out there are probably signed up. So it's going to be a lot of fun, and hopefully all this technical stuff works. So I'm going to practice a bit. So do check out Peter Byrne. Again, he is an up-and-coming quilter. He made a splash on the quilting world. Check out the Cotton Harvest website, and she has a ton of wool and Sue Spargo embroidery and kits and stuff. So check out her website, the Cotton Harvest in Seaforth, Ontario. And share this video so that you can win free fabric. And I think that's all I have for you tonight. So thank you for tuning in. I will see you next Thursday at 7 p.m. Central, and I will have another person to introduce to you and some more stuff to show. Have a good night.